fear is fear. Fear is just a normal reaction. And yet sometimes we are so hard on ourselves when we start to feel fear. When I feel fear or doubt or worry or stress, it is a signal. It's 100% a signal. For me, it means go put in the work. Fear can be overwhelming. Like it can just feel like it envelops you. Even if you don't go back to the 90-foot wave, at least get back on like a 20-foot. We face doubts in our life. We face fear. Like let's just get it out there and acknowledge it and then have a plan to deal with it.
Hey everyone, welcome to Flow Over Fear. Today is going to be a great episode because I have an incredible, inspiring, just amazing guest with an incredible story and background. And, speaking of fear, a lot of us experience fear in the day-to-day, and we experience, fear with regard to what we approach at work or in our careers or in our livelihoods. And not a lot of time spending that time in danger fear, like actual legitimate danger. And my guest today has spent a lot of time in that world as well. Her name is Kim Casey Campbell, and she's a retired colonel who served in the U.S. Air Force for 24 years. She was a fighter pilot who has flown over 1,800 hours in the A-10 Warthog, which is such a cool aircraft. If you haven't looked at it, Google it. It's really cool. And that includes more than 100 combat missions protecting troops on the ground during some intense battles in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And in 2003, Kim was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for heroism after she successfully recovered her battle-damaged airplane after a close air support mission where she was hit by anti-aircraft fire. You may have seen that if you were watching the news at that time on Barbara Walters, on CNN, all over. It was just an amazing story. And most recently, she served as the director of the Center for Leadership and Development at the Air Force Academy. And most recently, she's the author of the best-selling book, Flying in the Face of Fear, a fighter pilot's lessons on leading with courage. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm so grateful to have you here, Kim.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. So I think this will be an important topic on fear because that's something you know something about. And I want to kind of dig right into this, kind of going way back, like to how you got started in this idea, because I've in doing research, I learned that one of your first experiences in wanting to join the military came after something many of us of our age saw on television, which was, the Challenger disaster that happened in 1986. And I remember watching that and being terrified, like, as many of us were, and just seeing this idea of how we could lose our lives in an instant if we're doing something, heroic or something like that. My immediate response was, I would never want to do something like that. But yours was, you had a little different trajectory that kind of empowered or inspired you. Can you share a little bit about that and give some of your perspective when you're that age?
Yeah. I mean, I still kind of look back and wonder like how at 10 years old in 1986 that this changed the trajectory of my life, was watching the launch of the Space Shuttle Challenger. And I think, as you said, we all kind of remember where we were that day, and a lot of us watched it in school. But I remember watching it, and there was something about, the initial launch, obviously this thrill of flight, the excitement of it. But watching the tragedy, I think there was just something in that moment that I realized that those astronauts died doing what they believed in, that it was so big and important, bigger than themselves, that they were willing to risk their lives for it. And there was something powerful in that. And had a conversation with my mom, who was an oncology nurse at the time. And I just remember her saying, Kim, there are some things in life that are worth dying for, that you're willing to risk your life for. And I was like, all right, well, I think I want to be an astronaut. And I think they both were like, you want to do what? And my dad had been in the military for about 5 years. So not something that I grew up in, but he had told me that many of those astronauts were pilots, and many of those pilots had gone on to go to the Air Force Academy. So at 10 years old, I was like, well, that sounds pretty cool. I think that's what I want to do. I'm going to go to the Air Force Academy, become a fighter pilot, and hopefully someday go on to become an astronaut.
That's amazing. And I love that story that you had that like really audacious, inspiring dream. And this is something I've heard a few times over the last week, just coming back from an event that I was listening to another speaker or a few other speakers speak at, and some of the questions came up, in terms of what we value and how we live our lives, including what would you die for and what would you live for. And it sounds like you learned that pretty early on, like what you wanted to actually, like what those two things were, and that drove you forward. Is that right?
Yeah. And that's a big question. And I think, just when you said it, like the immediate, like sense of feeling for me was like, I was willing to die for my brothers and sisters that I served with in the air, my fellow pilots, but also my brothers and sisters that served on the ground, which in the airplane that I flew, the A-10 Warthog, that was our primary mission, was supporting troops on the ground. And so, yeah, that was absolutely like that almost, it brings me right back to why I chose that career field and why I stayed with it longer than I ever thought I would, is just that commitment to serve and to believe in something that you're willing to die for.
Yeah. So when you were young, like, so after you were 10, after you kind of had that commitment, that epiphany that you wanted to be an Air Force pilot, you wanted to become an astronaut and move in that direction. What was your experience beyond that? What was your relationship with fear around that idea? Did you have a relationship with fear? Was it just excitement? How did that look and shape as you were growing up?
I think I probably missed the reality part of it, of the fear. I think it was more excitement at the time of like excited to go out and do this thing. And it just, the thrill and excitement. I mean, I knew there was risk. I don't know that risk, that fear really sank in until my first deployment. I think the reality of what I was going to do, the reality of the pressure and like if I made a mistake or if I failed, like there were significant consequences to that. And so I think, those were the probably the big fears, but I don't know. I guess along the way, there are all those small fears too. They're not so small, right? It's fear of failure, fear of not meeting expectations. I had a lot of those. But in terms of my career and what I was doing, those didn't come till later.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, obviously your career took a bit of a different trajectory than like going straight from, Air Force to astronaut and all that. You became very, very combat experienced pretty quickly there. So you started in the military in 1997. Is that right?
That's then? When I graduated from the Air Force Academy, was 1997, and went to grad school, and then it takes quite a bit of training to go on to become a fighter pilot. So when I was finishing up my training in the A-10 was 2001.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about the A-10? Like just describe it for what people might not know, and talk about what ground support is and what you were doing there.
Yeah. So the A-10 Warthog, its official name is the Thunderbolt, but we call it the Warthog because that's a lot of what it looks like. It's a little bit slower than the traditional fighters, probably a little uglier. It's not your sleek, sexy, new age fighter, but its primary mission is to support our troops on the ground. And so it's a single seat airplane, only one pilot. But it is built to take hits while performing its mission. It's designed to kind of get down low, get dirty, like a Warthog might. So it's an incredible airplane, very reliable, very durable, and very respected by our troops on the ground, because that is absolutely what we train to do, is support them when they need it most.
Yeah, I remember some of the first times I saw that plane. I grew up near El Toro Marine Base, which is, they had a lot of that. They had a lot of air shows, and seeing that plane was it was so cool to see, just because it was so different looking than all of the F-14s, all that kind of stuff that was popular in Top Gun. But but it was, you could see that the functionality of it was pretty amazing, and from what I hear, the people on the ground really love it because it's what's up there, basically supporting them and that's pretty incredible. Yeah. So, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, like, I think the reason that we're so well respected is because that's exactly what we train for. I mean, it's not just what we train for in the airplane, but also kind of our mindset and our, this idea of our connection with the ground troops and really trying to understand what they do and how we can make a difference. I mean, I think that's what makes us good at it, is repetition. And being really good at one thing. And that's the one thing that we're really good at.
Yeah. Yeah. So there were a lot of folks, that joined the military. And I know a few that joined after 2001, after 9/11. And that's obviously when we saw a big change in how, in the function of our military, it seems like. I don't know if maybe I'm misrepresenting, but I know that our activity was, before that, was more in terms of, supporting other causes and things like that. Were you involved in any of those pre 9/11 kind of activities, or how did 9/11 really hit you? Like what was going through your head at that time when you realized that things had changed?
Yeah, I think I was in A-10 training. I was actually asleep because we were in crew rest to fly for night missions. And I remember the phone ringing. I remember one of my classmates. And of course, at the time, I'm like, why are you calling me? You're interrupting my crew rest. It was a big deal. And he said, Kim, turn on the TV. And I turned on the TV and at that point watched the second airplane hit the World Trade Center. And I think it was just this realization. I knew immediately, I was like, we're under attack. And the realization of my life as an Air Force officer and Air Force pilot was going to change dramatically. But it was also kind of this, I think it felt very personal for all of us because we're sitting in the room. We all got recalled to the squadron, and there's people in there who have brothers and sisters and parents who are in the Pentagon or airline pilots. And it felt very personal. So I think it was like, we knew something was coming. We knew something was going to happen. And we felt like we were going to be called on to go do it.
Yeah. And ultimately you were. And while your relationship with fear, while maybe it wasn't necessarily there from 10 to whatever age you were at that point, maybe, how did that change when your reality changed? Did you have any fears going into that?
I think it was a bit of a reality check. I think pre 9/11, it's hard to know when we were going to deploy, if we were going to deploy, and then 9/11 happens and it's like, we know we're going. And we got the call pretty quickly. We were in Afghanistan in 2002 and then in Iraq in 2003. And it was just the reality of it all. I think you talk about it, you train for it, and then you're in it. And all of a sudden this, I would say, fear of not being able to perform up to expectations and letting the ground troops down. I didn't really have a lot of fear for my personal life yet. I mean, I think there's a little bit of like, we feel like as fighter pilots, maybe we're invincible. That all changed in Iraq in 2003. That was a life-changing, life-defining, put fear in a whole new perspective for me.
Sure. Yeah. And that's getting us into that fear of like that moment, that split second fear. So yeah, can you walk us through that experience? I know that you've probably walked through it many times, but just for us here, can you share with that experience what happened in 2003 that led to that?
Yeah, I mean, I have talked about it a lot, but I think at the same time, like, I learned so much from it. I mean, it's such a life-defining moment. I hope that I can share that with other people too. I feel like not everybody has the benefit, that might be a weird word to use, of going through something like that. I feel like looking back, it's a bit of a benefit because it's shaped who I am.
Yeah.
But I want to share that with others. And I think, the thing for me was that was like a day like every other day for us, where our primary mission, support the troops on the ground. We're going to take off from Kuwait, fly up to Baghdad, air refuel, and then just wait for tasking. That was pretty consistent at that point. Unfortunately, the weather that day was not very good. We struggled to even see the ground below. We had a struggle trying to find the tanker. So already things are kind of not going great. But we got an immediate call as soon as we arrived, and ground controller, high-pitched voice, we're taking fire. We need immediate assistance. And it's at that moment, like, the adrenaline starts going, right? I know immediately lives are on the line. And now it's kind of like the pressure of like, we have to go get in there as fast as we can. And so we went right over the top of the target area, and we're just kind of circling, looking for a hole in the clouds so that we could get down below the weather. And then we get down below the weather, and I can instantly see this firefight. I mean, there are bright flashes, there's smoke, there's tracers going back and forth across the river. And it feels very surreal in some ways. I mean, it's everything that we train for, everything that we plan for. And then it's not, because now I start to see puffs of gray and white smoke and bright flashes in the air. And I know not only is there this firefight happening across the river, but now the enemy is shooting up at us too.
Yeah. Wow.
You fall back on your training though. I mean, the guys on the ground need our help. So we're aware of this. We decide we're just going to do a couple passes, then we'll climb up, reassess things. But we're willing to take that risk for the troops on the ground. And we do a couple passes. And then on my last pass, it's a rocket pass. I set up, I get everything set and ready to go. I roll in, I fine tune my aim point. The rockets hit the weapons release button, 7 rockets come out. And then, our standard reaction is we pull away from the ground, away from the threat, just to get our energy back. And then I just feel and hear this loud explosion at the back of the airplane. And I mean, I knew immediately I was hit. There was no doubt in my mind. And the jet nosed over. I could see Baghdad below, and I instinctively just pulled back on our control stick, and nothing happened. And I was just that moment of fear that I didn't really recognize at the time, but I just, okay, now the ground's getting closer. Do I need to eject? Am I going to crash? Am I going to survive? All these thoughts are going through my mind in a very short period of time. And I, again, fall back on my training. I'm trying to figure out what's going on, but I've got lights flashing. I look up at we have a caution panel that has a lot of lights. Half of them are lit up, it feels like. And I realize very quickly that my hydraulic system has been depleted, which is what allows us to fly an airplane. And at this point, I know I have 2 options. One is eject, which, I did look down at my ejection handles and thought there is no way I want to eject over Baghdad.
Yeah.
This is not going to go well.
Was that just a fear out of getting captured, or was it just what was the fear there?
All of the above. It's the fear of ejecting over Baghdad. One, I could die. I could be captured, which might be worse. There's nothing good that is going to come out of this. The one chance I have is maybe I eject over the friendly location and float down in my parachute over the friendlies. So there's a chance that something could go well.
Yeah.
But I don't think about that fear. I just think of that's not something I want to do. Let me try something else. And that is get this jet into this backup emergency system. And thankfully, the jet started climbing slowly, but it started climbing, and I started getting more control over it. And that was kind of the first moment where I figured, I might actually make it out of here alive.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. And
a little bit of a sense of relief.
Yeah. And as I was looking through this, there's video footage of this actually happening, of your plane getting hit and kind of, and you see the plane just, kind of going out of control. But you tapped into backup systems, you say, to actually help you stabilize and get you back to a friendly base.
Yeah. So the A-10, as I said, was built to take hits. And so it has an emergency backup system that allows you to fly the airplane without hydraulics. So you're now working off cranks, cables, pulleys, kind of like old school flying.
Wow.
But it was not an easy task. I mean, I had an hour to fly the airplane home in this emergency backup system. Very difficult to fly. I mean, physically just heavy, very heavy. I've heard other pilots say it's like driving a dump truck or a semi truck without power steering. I don't know. All I can tell you is very heavy.
Yeah.
Exhausting to fly at the hour flight home, but it was flying. And that's really what I cared about. And then I think from a mental standpoint, of mental difficulty was contemplating that you might live or die for an hour. As much as I'd love to tell you that I focused on flying in the airplane and thought about nothing else and went through my emergency checklist, I did. Mm-hmm. But it's hard to fly for an hour and think about the possibility of dying and not allow thoughts to creep in I've been married for a few years. We haven't had kids yet. I'm too young to die. All those thoughts are trying to get into my head. And I'm doing my best to just compartmentalize and tuck those away and not think about them and just really focus on flying the airplane.
Yeah. I mean, that's something a lot of people I don't, and certainly I haven't thought about is the idea that, you get shot at and you just don't immediately land. You have to fly an hour back to your base. That's a long way to be in your thoughts.
It was almost worse. It was like,
Yeah.
there was the immediate fear, right? Like
Right.
that I didn't even know I was scared. Like I was like, I didn't even have time. And then I listened to the audio and I could hear the fear in my voice when I got hit. I mean, I can just, I can tell that I was scared, but it happened so fast. I just didn't have time to think about it. And then there was this like very prolonged fear, for an hour, just thinking of like, what do I do? What's the right decision? Evaluating the airplane and trying to keep those, terrible thoughts out of my mind.
Mhm.
It was more of like just this prolonged, where you question everything and think
Yeah.
about all the terrible things that can happen. And at some point you just got to get over that and really focus on what you're doing. And for me, I had to make a decision. Like at some point I've got to make a decision and make the best decision I can with the information I have. And I decided to land the airplane.
Hmm. Wow. Yeah. It's such an incredible story of how we have a massive ability to overcome, whatever present situations or long-term situations we're in that cause us, significant challenge. And you mentioned compartmentalization there. I kind of want to dig into that a little bit because you have these things, these obvious and very rational fears that are coming into your mind at that moment, but you have a task at hand.
Yeah.
What did that look like for you in terms of, did you learn any lessons of how to approach that in the moment fear that helped you to focus and just get the job done?
Yeah, I think we have to give ourselves some grace, right? Like these are normal thoughts and reactions when you're facing a really difficult situation. And, sometimes we're so hard on ourselves about like, why am I thinking about that stuff? Like that's, I should just be focused. But for me, compartmentalizing it and tucking it away, which I know is not always healthy, but in the moment, it helped me get home. I knew that at some point I was going to have to like unpack that and think through it. But for the moment of getting through that situation, I had to just kind of shut that part down, to shut that part off and really focus on what I was doing, my task right then, what was going to help me be successful, what was going to help me land this airplane. And I will tell you, I didn't do this alone. I had this amazing wingman by my side who was really helping to keep me focused. He would occasionally ask like, hey, Casey, it's my call sign, how are you doing? But a lot of the time he's like, let's do this checklist. We probably went through checklist twice because I think he realized like it's a lot of quiet time and quiet time wasn't necessarily what I needed.
Right.
But he really helped talk me through it. So I think those are things, just kind of keeping your mind focused, focusing on what's most important, focusing on those things you can control, which, all those other things I was thinking about are not things at the moment I could control other than trying to fly my airplane and land safely. So I use that technique, in my regular life outside of flying as well, just to make sure that I'm focusing on what is really, truly important.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's such great advice. Cause it can help us in the moments of fear. I mean, I love that you say giving ourselves grace because these are things that we do experience. These are feelings that we have and they're inherent within us. And the comparison, learning that we just shouldn't compare our traumas or our experiences with other people and then shame ourselves for feeling that way because not all of us are getting into, serious situations in the air. It might just be a day-to-day work environment thing or a crucial conversation that we're afraid of having.
Of course.
But acknowledging it is so important. Hey, everyone, I interrupt this program to introduce you to a powerful tool that will help you gain clarity on your vision and accelerate your growth and achievement. If you're listening to this show, it is likely that you have an exciting vision for your life. But the problem is that we often get caught up in the day-to-day. We get distracted. We face uncertainty, overwhelm, and self-doubt. And as a result, the gap between where you are and where you want to be seems insurmountable. And that's why I created a framework
for how you can turn your vision into strategic, disciplined action that will accelerate your results in the next 90 days. I call it the Vision Reflection Retreat. It is a 2-day solo excursion designed to reignite passion and adventure into your busy life and realign your focus toward your why. This is the very same framework that I use every 90 days to reflect on my own life and my vision and set my goals for the next quarter. And it has been a game changer. And the good news is that I'm giving away this Vision Reflection Retreat guidebook for free when you sign up for my newsletter. Simply go to flowoverfear.com/retreat and download your free guide and enjoy the journey.
Yeah, and that's, that's the thing that I've pulled from this is like, the reality is like, this was a terrifying moment, life-changing moment. But I have felt fear many times throughout my life, like it's just, I look back and now that I've had the opportunity to reflect, I think about all those times where I felt fear, whether it was like going to basic training. Like I was scared because I didn't want them to yell at me, which they were going to do anyway. But like, you don't want to fail. You're scared of failing. You're scared of like making mistakes or standing out not in a good way.
Yeah.
I think of moments of like, even just walking into my first fighter squadron, the first time of being the only woman and like all the pressure that I felt. And it was like fear of letting people down and the fear of ruining it for the women that followed me. Like, those are real fears. Was it life or death? No, but in the moment, it felt kind of like life or death. It's just, those are normal things. And I just think there's so much that, it all ties together because fear is fear. Fear is just a normal reaction. And yet sometimes we are so hard on ourselves when we start to feel fear. We're like, ooh, that makes us weak or vulnerable, whatever terrible word we come up with to try to describe it. But it's just a normal reaction. And the key is you just got to be able to do something about it when you feel that fear.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I like to think of fear as not something that's an obstacle, but it's a signal. It's just sharing with us that, yeah, we're either in danger or we have an opportunity.
Yeah.
And we should really lean into that.
I love it. I love that idea of a signal. Because for me, I think when I feel fear or doubt or worry or stress, whatever level you want to talk about, like it is a signal. It's 100% a signal. For me, it means go put in the work. Like, why are you feeling fear right now? A lot of times it's because I haven't put in the work. I haven't prepared enough. I haven't thought through the situation. Like, even like you said, if it's just having a tough conversation, I say it's having a tough conversation with somebody. Well, like that makes me nervous. Like sometimes I feel that fear coming on. So it's all about like, then I'm like, okay, let me think through it. Let me actually visualize this conversation that I'm going to have. Most of the time after that, I'm like, okay, I can do this. Like I'm still nervous, but I can do it.
Right. It's signaling that you should maybe get prepared for it. Maybe you should do something. But I really, really love that idea. That the fear doesn't go away. Even if you go through one of the hardest situations that you could go through, life or death, it doesn't go away later on the small things. It's still there. But it's how you use it. And that's why your message is so powerful and important to all of us, is it just happens at the extreme ends and maybe the not so extreme ends, but they feel that way in the moment.
Yeah. And it's okay, right?
Yeah.
It is okay.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. So when you landed the plane, can you kind of talk us through like what your feelings were once you got through that? I mean, I know that a lot of times there's those feelings like once you get through something and you're done with it, maybe there's a sense of relief, but there's also that pent up energy that might just be like just flooding out. What did it look like for you?
So coming back into land, it's interesting because I recently listened to the audio again, and my flight lead says, are you sure you still want, or not, maybe not, are you sure, but like, do you still want to land the airplane? Essentially like giving me my last chance. Do you still want to go through with this? He wasn't doubting me in any way. Is this what you want to do? And I came back so confidently. I was like, yep, I'm ready to land. It's shocking to me now, even listening to it. I was like, was I faking that? Like, how was I so confident in that moment?
Yeah.
But I think I just, I had flown the airplane for an hour. I felt good about my decision based on how the airplane was flying. I was confident in my training and preparation and everything leading up to that moment. But, still, it's kind of game time, right? Like it's go time right now. This is either going to go well or it's going to go terribly wrong. And I just remember coming into land and as soon as I crossed the landing threshold, so just before the runway, like the airplane just started this quick roll to the left. And that was the one moment of like, I don't know, almost overwhelming fear of like, oh no, did I make the wrong decision? You know, am I going to crash? Is the airplane going to flip over on its back? Do I even have time to eject? Mm-hmm. All these things going through in like a half second. And I just, you know, yanked the stick back, and thankfully the airplane leveled out. And I just remember, you know, such slow motion coming in, you know, 30 feet now. And I'm thinking, it's that, please just, you know, just let me make it. Like, just let me make it. I'm so close now. And then feeling the main gear and the nose gear hit the ground was relief, is utter relief, tremendous relief. I can't even explain this feeling of relief. It like washed through me. Like it just complete relief, utter and complete relief that I felt in that moment of just being safe and being on the ground. And then realizing I still had to get the jet stopped because I didn't have normal braking. Thankfully, our emergency braking system also worked, but got the airplane stopped, got out to see the damage. I mean, hundreds of holes in the fuselage and tail section, a hole about the size of a football in the back tail section of the airplane, and just like almost shock. I mean, the jet was dripping with hydraulic fluid. It was covered with like black char from a fire. I mean, wow. It was just incredibly damaged. And I remember just seeing all these Marine firefighters who were standing around the airplane, and they're kind of looking at me, looking at the airplane. Everyone just kind of in shock that this airplane kept flying. But it was just, yeah, there was still adrenaline, and it took me a long time to come down from that adrenaline rush. I think it was still like, did that just happen? Did I just go through that? Like almost shock of like, did I just do that? Like, really? I kind of, you know, went through these, you know, first is the relief, then is this feeling of shock. And then it's like, whew, now I got to come down from this. And the reality, I think, sunk in a little bit. Thankfully, someone told me to write a journal when I was in combat, and I wrote a journal. And so that night when I came back to my room, finally some quiet space, I wrote the whole thing out in a journal. Like, how grateful am I that I have that today to look back at and know what I was thinking and feeling in that moment. But it was like a purge of emotion and everything, the adrenaline, the relief, it all came out on the paper. And I think that is probably the only thing that helped me go to sleep that night. But also just an amazing support network of people surrounding me, just like making sure I was okay. And, you know, I think just welcoming me back, and just, you know, having that support network, and my wingman, you know, by my side through it all. So yeah, I mean, life-defining, life-changing moment. And it took a while for the reality of it all to sink in. Yeah.
Wow. Now, when you say wingman, was that somebody that was flying alongside you, or was it? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So we always fly in at least 2, maybe 4 aircraft. And so I had my wingman by my side, you know, the whole way back. He's tucked in right next to me, talking to me, everything. And then, you know, after we landed, I had lots of wingmen. Right now, my whole squadron they're my wingmen, right?
Right.
Of just, you know, checking in on me. I remember they were like, you know, kind of like, you want to go like watch a movie? Like everybody's kind of like, what do we do? Like just do normal stuff. Like we went and watched Born Identity or whatever was out back in 2003. I remember watching, just clearly not that well, but just something to kind of ease the mind at the time.
Sure. Yeah. Wow. That's just, yeah, it's incredible. I mean, and just to know like what's kind of going through your mind, not sleep or being able to sleep that night, journaling that night, writing it all out, and having that available. How, were you back up in the air, back doing missions right away, or did you have to take some time? How did that work out?
It worked out not like it was supposed to. So the next day, we actually were tasked with sitting alert, combat search and rescue alert. So usually that means that there's a alert shack, if you will, next to the runway. Usually it's like rest, relax, sleep, because combat search and rescue means that if you get launched, somebody's been shot down. And so it's not a mission that happens frequently, but our role in that mission is we go help find the survivor on the ground. We call in rescue helicopters. We escort them in. So it's a pretty busy, intense mission. But for the most part, doesn't happen frequently. So I think intentionally I was probably tasked for that mission with the idea that we just relax and sleep and chill for a day. And then the alarm sound. It was not a drill. An A-10 pilot got shot down in Baghdad, right where I had escaped pretty much my own shoot down. And I didn't think about it. I mean, the alarm sounds, we ran to the jets, we get our gear on, we make an immediate takeoff. We're so focused on, where is the pilot? What shot him down? What's his condition? Where are the closest rescue helicopters? Like, we're just busy going through this stuff. And, he ended up getting picked up by friendly ground forces. So we only made it about 30 minutes into Iraq before we turned around once we knew he was safe. But I think, I look back and I didn't even think about it. I mean, those guys were there for me the day before. I was going to do the same for this pilot. We were a team and I didn't want to let them down. I have yet to figure out the best way to phrase this, but it was probably the best way for me to get back in the airplane. Not the best thing that somebody got shot down, but just, I think the less time that I had to think on it and dwell on it and like let that fear build almost of like what could happen on the next mission, I think it was just really helpful to get back in the airplane. It's, it's the whole saying, like, you get back on the horse when you get kicked off or fall off. I think just getting back in the airplane was good. I mean, there was still fear. Like I still, I was nervous. Like the reality of war hit, right? Like the reality of, I guess I'm not so invincible hit. But I think the thing that helped me through that fear was this bigger purpose. Like I had a job to do. There were guys on the ground that needed our help, and that was my job. And so it allowed me to, fear didn't go away, but it allowed me to kind of just refocus and maybe set it aside a little bit. It was always still maybe lingering a bit, but I had a job to do.
Yeah. It's such an interesting perspective and a very important perspective is that not a lot of us go through those kinds of experiences where we have a life or death situation. We have to do the very same thing the next day. And it sounds to me, it reminds me of a story that I heard about Laird Hamilton, famous big wave surfer, who talked about, and I don't quite remember the total details of the story, but he was surfing a giant 90-foot wave that he does. And he ended up wiping out like really epically, and I think somebody else was involved in that was more, that wiped out harder or something like that. Maybe it was the jet ski or something. I'm butchering this, but one of them had to be taken to the shore to go to the hospital. But Laird was okay. But he was shaken significantly. He just wiped out on a 90-foot wave. But even though his friend was being taken to the hospital, he was like, I've got to get out there and go back out and surf so that I can get through this fear. And I've always thought about that. It's like, wow, that's, is that the right way? Is going right back, getting back on the horse? I mean, there's some merit to that based on what you're saying.
Yeah. I've read that story in a magazine, I think. And I don't remember the specific details either, but I know what you're saying. It's like that fear can be overwhelming. Like it can just feel like it envelops you, and to be able to, like, even if you don't go back to the 90-foot wave, at least get back on like a 20-foot wave. That sounds enormous anyway.
It does. It's huge.
But like maybe it's small steps. Like it's whatever you can do.
Yeah.
But it's just, getting out of bed the next morning and knowing that, just a small step towards getting back into it, getting back on the horse again, whatever it may be, getting back in the jet again. It helped me tremendously. I think from that first mission, because I didn't have a whole lot of time to really dwell on it, I just was able to kind of get back in the rhythm of things. And those fears I had, the things I compartmentalized, the reality is I tucked them away until I got home from that deployment. I couldn't bring myself to deal with that or think about it.
Did you have to work through that once you did get home? Like, was there a processing period? We don't have to dig into it too much.
No, I think one of the things that was really important was my husband and I were fairly newly married, and we had to have some really like big conversations about like what's important in life. What do we really want out of it? Where are we willing to make sacrifices? Where are we not? I think that those conversations that we had together about, like, I finally admitted to somebody, my husband, that I was scared on that mission. I was terrified. Like, and even getting back in the jet was hard, but I was so afraid to admit that I was afraid to anybody else, but like having that conversation with my husband and just afraid that like I could have done something where I never would have had kids. I wouldn't have lived my life. Like, I just opening up about those things, like, just was just a relief. It was like, okay, we've talked about them. It just, I don't know, it put life into perspective. It was such almost a blessing in a way to have that conversation very early in our marriage. I think it just set us up for success later when we dealt with difficult things. It was like, let's go back to our priorities. What is most important?
Yeah. And he's a service member too. Is that correct? Yeah.
He was also an A-10 pilot. He retired a few years ago as well. So he knew exactly what I was going through and, what the situation was. I mean, he thankfully was sleeping at the time, just based on, he was working on the ground with some special operators and was asleep when this all happened. I cannot fathom the fear that he would have felt just watching or listening. My gosh.
Yeah.
So thankfully he found out later on that morning. I had called to talk to him afterwards. And so the intelligence officer that he worked with just left him a note that said, "Hey, Soup," his call sign, "your wife got hit over Baghdad. She's okay, but you should give her a call." So that's how he found out.
Man, if only I had a nickel for every time I've heard that. Your wife was hit over Baghdad.
Your so-and-so's okay. Yeah.
Yeah. No, yeah. That's oh man, it's crazy to think about, but you processed it when you got, when you worked, I mean, and then you grew your career through the military and now ultimately wrote a book about your experience and how it's called Flying in the Face of Fear, by the way. It's available now. It talks about that relative to leadership. And, you became a leader in the military, went through the ranks, retired as a colonel. Is that correct? Retired as a colonel. And yeah, so you have that experience, not just overcoming fear, but in leadership. Can you talk a lot about some of those lessons that you try to help leaders through, based on your own experience?
Yeah, I think it's so interesting. One of the things about the book was that when I started working through the title of the book, I did have a few people that were like, I don't know if you want to use the word fear in the title. Like, that may not be like, people might look at that, like, doubt a little bit if they should pick that book up or should they have it on their bookshelf. And I'm like, that's exactly why it should be in the title, because nobody wants to admit that they're scared. And like, especially like CEOs, presidents, leaders, whether you're leading, 500 people, 4 people, or yourself, like, we face doubts in our life. We face fear. Like, let's just get it out there and acknowledge it and then have a plan to deal with it. And so that's what the book is about. It's the recognition that, I realized throughout my life, I have felt fear many times. So how do we deal with it? How do we take action when we feel that fear? And to me, it is all about what you do in that moment. That's what matters the most, right? It's the fear of having that tough conversation as a leader. It's a fear of holding people accountable. It's, the fear of delegating, whatever it is. These are normal, like, worries and fears that we can feel. And it is about being able to take action. So the idea is, how do we face that fear and now lead with courage? And it's the idea that it takes courage to do a lot of things in leadership and life, whether it's courage to trust people, to meet people and connect with them on a very human level. That takes courage. And we can feel fear about that. I feel fear when I'm vulnerable with people, when I open up, but guess what? That creates trust and connection. So it's this whole idea that there are many things that we are going to do in life, small, big, whatever way we want to look at them. It's going to be hard. We're going to have doubts. We're going to have worry. We're going to have fears. It is about stepping up to take action in the face of fear.
I absolutely love that. And I've learned that myself in not a so extreme circumstance, but learn that, we are going to live with fear is when you can finally accept that as an inevitability of life, that you cannot run away from fear. You cannot fight against it. You cannot suppress it or push it down. Only worse things happen from that. But your world expands when you can actually maybe even embrace it and it becomes more. I'm really, really excited to read your book because it speaks to me. Your story speaks to me. It's an incredible demonstration of what we're capable of. And I have to ask too, is your dream of becoming an astronaut, is that still there? Are you still wanting to get to space?
I would do it in a heartbeat if somebody asked.
Yeah.
Now it looks like you can, if you have enough money, you can get to space.
Right.
It's always interesting. People always like, wait a second, there was that dream you had. And, there's also a little fear in this, right? Like, I have this big goal, I have this big dream. And at some point in my life, I realized like, I would still love to do that. But I also want to have a family. I want to have kids. And I love flying the A-10. I was not ready to give that up. And I was just really happy with the path that I was on. And it's okay to readjust your path and your dreams and your goals along the way. But the short answer is I would still do it in a heartbeat. I don't know how my husband and my kids would feel about that. But yeah, it's something that still would be incredible. It'd be incredible opportunity. But
well, here's what I really love about that perspective on it is because you have this dream that is not like wholly contingent on you necessarily achieving it to be happy, right? But you've established this pathway to get there that is that sounds to me like it's incredibly fulfilling.
Yeah,
and that should be the goal, right?
Well, that's it. It almost became bigger than the dream. Like it was the journey I found that I loved and, found passion and purpose in. And I was like, that's still cool, but I really I love what I'm doing. I'm happy. Have been in a good place. I still am in a good place. I love what I do. Now it's, my life's a little bit different. I'm not flying A-10s anymore, but I absolutely love helping, leaders and teams and individuals just on their journey and sharing the lessons. I think it's so important that we share our stories and the lessons learned, because I think we can help other people on their journey, especially when we share those mistakes and failures along the way that we aren't so proud of, but that we learned a lot from.
Yeah. Well, you share your story from this and your experience and your perspectives on fear from the stage. You're a very sought after speaker and a best-selling author, which is incredible. And what kind of leaders are you looking to work with? Or is there any kind of avatar that you want to kind of that maybe listening to this saying, oh, that's speaking to me? Like, and what do you hope they get out of that?
I think, what I've realized is there is this, there's the very experienced leaders who have been there and done it, but maybe need a new perspective or just want to hear something a little bit differently. And then there's also the young, inexperienced, ready to soak it all in. And so I think it's the emerging leaders and the experienced leaders and everyone in between. I don't think there's a specific, avatar per se. I think it's just, it's anybody that's willing to grow and listen and learn. And I think that's the thing on our own journeys. We need to be willing to learn and grow and develop and never stop. I feel like even at the peak of my Air Force career, in my final assignment as the director for the Center for Character and Leadership Development, I learned a ton from the people around me. I was surrounded by these amazing people who were so well spoken and developed in terms of leadership. And I learned so much from them on that journey too. And so it's just a reminder, we all have something that we can, if we, open up and listen, we can improve, we can grow, we can get better. And part of that is sharing stories with each other.
Thank you so much for that. And if you are listening and you want to get in touch with Kim and maybe hire her to speak or work with your company, how can people get in touch with you?
I think the one-stop shop is my website because it's got links to all my social media, but it's kim-kc-campbell.com. You can also reach out on LinkedIn, same address there, and then or Instagram, Twitter, now X. There it's KC HAWG 987. That's Casey Hogg 987 Hogg because of the airplane, and 987 was the tail number that I flew on that day. But I would say, please reach out, especially if there's something that we didn't talk about or another question that we didn't answer, just reach out. I'd be happy to chat. It'd be great.
Yeah, because we've only touched the surface. I mean, we dug in on a specific topic, but there's so much more. I wish we could spend hours on this. I'm incredibly inspired by you, and And thank you so much for all you have done, all you continue to do. It's one thing to be just selfless and want to, be willing to die and live for your brothers and sisters, but to actually, be helping lift people up out of fear is a whole other thing. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. I enjoyed it.
Thank you. And to everyone else out there, thanks for joining us today. Be sure to check out Kim Casey Campbell and buy her book, Flying in the Face of Fear. You won't regret it. It's an incredible story. And we just touched the surface on it here today, too. So do that. And don't forget to share this with a friend, somebody who might get a lot from it. Thanks for joining us today. We'll see you next time. Thanks.
Thank you so much for joining me today on Flow Over Fear. If you are liking this show, please do me a favor and hit the subscribe button. That way you'll be first to know when I drop a new episode, including interviews or trainings or dad jokes. That's right, dad jokes. Add a little levity to your life. And if you liked this episode in particular and you think somebody can get something from it, please share it with a friend. And that way we'll spread the message together. Thanks again for joining me today. We'll see you next time.